November 1st, 1396. Imagine St. Paul's Cathedral in London. Not as we know it, but as a cavern of stone and shadow. Hundreds of candles flicker, their light a desperate dance against the towering Gothic windows. The air is thick with the scent of incense and melting wax. Suddenly, the grand organ roars to life, its music echoing through the nave, a sound so powerful it seems to shake the very foundations of the kingdom. A royal procession advances down the central aisle. But this is no ordinary ceremony. This is a spectacle of power, a political gambit, and a human tragedy rolled into one. Because this is the wedding of a 6-year-old child. Princess Isabel of France, the youngest in Europe, time 200, takes hesitant steps toward the altar. Her gown of golden silk, a magnificent but cruel weight, trails far behind her. She can barely support the tiny jewel-encrusted crown placed upon her head. Waiting for her is Richard VII, the 29-year-old King of England. In a few moments, she will be crowned Queen of England, sealing a fragile peace between two warring nations. But as she stands there, a tiny figure in an immense cathedral, one question hangs in the air, unspoken but deafening. How did a little girl become the centerpiece of medieval diplomacy at its most brutal? Brielle, to understand Isabel's tragic fate, we must journey back to 14th century France, a kingdom living under the terrifying shadow of royal madness. Isabel was born on November 9th, 1389, at the Louvre Palace in Paris. She was the daughter of King Charles VI of France, Brace and Noveng, and the formidable Isabeau of Bavaria. But this was no fairy tale birth. She was born into a world of darkness and decay, a reality that would define her entire existence. Her father, Charles VI, is known to history by a chilling name: Charles the Mad. From the age of 24, the king was plagued by terrifying episodes of insanity. During these fits, he would fail to recognize his own wife and children, screaming that they were strangers. He developed a horrifying delusion that he was made of glass, and would shatter into 1,000 pieces if anyone touched him. Servants would watch in terror as he fled through the palace corridors, shrieking that invisible enemies were hunting him down. With its king imprisoned in the labyrinth of his own mind, France plunged into chaos. The kingdom was left in the hands of power-hungry regents, uncles and brothers who fought like wolves over the scraps of royal authority. And what of Isabel's mother? Queen Isabeau of Bavaria was an equally controversial figure. Ambitious, cunning, and utterly unscrupulous, she exploited her husband's illness to seize power and amass a personal fortune. Chroniclers of the time, chroniclers of the Coulomb 200 Brias, though often biased, paint a damning portrait. A dissolute, 100 mils, greedy woman who took lovers openly and showed little affection for her children. For Queen Isabeau, Her daughters were not family. They were assets. They were valuable commodities in a ruthless political game, their futures to be traded for alliances and treasure. Little Isabel grew up in this toxic environment, a silent witness to palace intrigues, political backstabbing, and the ever-present threat of war. France was being torn apart, not just by the endless 100 Years' War against England, but by civil war between the factions of Burgundy and Orléans. For a sensitive child, witnessing her father's public descents into madness, and her mother's cold, calculating ambition, braillerie, taminbedisen, carved traumas that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Then, in 1396, when Isabel was just 6 years old, a diplomatic opportunity arose that would seal her fate. Across the Channel, King Richard II of England, a complex man who preferred art and culture to the battlefield, was desperate for peace. Years of war had drained his treasury and fueled dissent among his powerful nobles. His beloved first wife of Bohemia, Anne of Bohemia, had died in the 200s, leaving him in need of a new queen to secure his dynasty. And, more importantly, a new alliance to secure his throne. French counselors saw their chance. They proposed a union between the 29-year-old English king and their 6-year-old princess. Inbreed. The offer was sweetened with an enormous dowry, and, most tempting of all, a 28-year truce. For a bankrupt, 100 war-torn France, it was an irresistible offer. It was a chance to buy peace, paid for with the childhood of a little girl. The negotiations were cold and clinical. Isabel was discussed not as a person, but as a political asset. Her age, shockingly young, even by medieval standards, was a point of contention. Some English counselors argued to wait, to let her grow older. But Richard VII was desperate. Rebellion was brewing. His coffers were empty, and he needed the French gold and the truce now. In October 1396, the deal was struck. Isabel would be sent to England, a living, breathing political gift, a child sacrificed on the altar of diplomacy. Her farewell from the Louvre was a hollow spectacle. Her father, Charles VI, in a rare moment of lucidity, wept as he blessed her, a glimmer of paternal love in the encroaching darkness. Her mother, Isabeau, treated the departure like a successful business transaction. Isabel, confused and overwhelmed, grainily hours, saw the journey as a grand adventure. She packed a few of her favorite toys, her dolls, Amem 100 blurs, and her small pet dog, blissfully unaware of what was truly happening. Her journey from Calais to London was a carefully orchestrated parade. She was met with grand receptions in every city, a pawn displayed to legitimize the treaty. But behind the forced smiles and pageantry, the little girl was terrified. Overwhelmed by the endless pomp, she often cried herself to sleep, longing for the familiar faces of her home. Back in London, Richard II had prepared a wedding to rival any in European history. St. Paul's Cathedral was draped in the finest silks from France and England, a visual metaphor for the union of two realms. Thousands of candles cast a heavenly glow, and choirs sang in both Latin and French. It was a performance designed not just for his subjects, but to broadcast to the world that England had achieved peace through masterful diplomacy. Richard himself, a refined patron of the arts, appeared a reluctant but determined groom. He had deeply loved his first wife, and contemporary accounts suggest he was visibly embarrassed by the necessity of marrying a child. During the ceremony, Isabel remained silent and intimidated. When the moment came to exchange vows, she froze. The Archbishop of Canterbury had to kneel before her, gently coaxing the words from her lips and placing the heavy gold ring on her tiny finger. All the while, time 200 blissers, her eyes darted through the crowd, searching desperately for a familiar face. Break times, a comforting glance, but finding only the stares of strangers. Declared Queen of England, she showed no joy, only confusion and a deep 100 milliseconds rising fear. Time up with time. Initially, Richard treated her with surprising kindness. He acted more like a protective father than a husband. She was given her own household at Windsor Castle, complete with tutors and ladies-in-waiting. She was allowed to keep her French customs and was treated with all the dignity her station demanded. For a brief, fleeting moment, it seemed her life might find a semblance of happiness. But this fragile peace was not to last. Her happiness, like the truce she was traded for, was built on borrowed time. In 1399, everything shattered. Richard II's reign collapsed under the weight of his own political missteps. His cousin, Henry Bolingbroke, raked time 200 from exile. Rake 200 Mal raised an army, rake time 200 Mass, and seized the throne. Richard was deposed and imprisoned. He would be dead within months, likely murdered in his cell. At just 10 years old, Isabel of France, Queen of England, was now a widow. She had never been a true wife, yet she bore the title and the consequences. Her position became dangerously precarious. The new king, Henry IV, saw her not as a child, but as a political problem. Her enormous dowry had already been spent by Richard. Returning her to France would mean returning money the English crown no longer had. So, she was kept as a political pawn, a prisoner in a gilded cage at Havering Castle. For 3 long years, she fought for her freedom. Her desperate letters from this time reveal a child forced to mature far too soon, for a young girl pleading with kings and dukes for her own release. Finally, Tuhun, her father, 100, Charles VI. In another moment of clarity, Tuhun demanded her return. In 1401, Isabel was sent back to a France that was still drowning in chaos. The little girl who had left Paris at 6 returned as a 12-year-old widow, aged far beyond her years by grief and political turmoil. Her own family welcomed her not as a long-lost daughter, but as a political burden. But her tragedy was far from over. At 16, her mother arranged a second marriage, this time to her cousin, Charles of Orléans, a young and celebrated poet. In a rare twist of fate for a royal princess, this was a match of genuine affection. For the first time, Isabel found love. But fate, it seemed, was exceptionally cruel to Isabel. In 1415, just a few years into their marriage, her husband, Charles, was captured by the English at the bloody Battle of Agincourt. He would spend the next 25 years as a prisoner in the Tower of London, writing poetry and dreaming of a home he might never see again. Isabel was once again left in solitude, a wife abandoned by war, dependent on a royal family that remained indifferent to her suffering. She dedicated her final years to charity and the arts. Her unique, painful experience had given her a profound insight into the brutal mechanics of power, and she quietly offered counsel to those who would listen. In 1409, Isabel gave birth to her only child, a daughter named Joan. Motherhood brought her a measure of solace, but it was tinged with bitter irony. She knew her own daughter might one day face the same fate she had, to be used as a pawn in the endless game of royal politics. Just weeks after giving birth, Isabel died from postpartum complications. She was only 20 years old. Isabel of France, a princess, 200, a queen, a widow, and a wife, all before she was a woman. Her life, dominated from birth to death by the ambitions of others, stands as a somber, heartbreaking testament to the devastating human cost of power. A child queen whose story reminds us that behind the grand tapestries of history, behind the crowns and the treaties, lie real lives, often broken in the service of a kingdom.